everybody, it's Angel from Halo Inspirations. We give you inspirations to help you spread beauty and joy through your quilting journey. Today is the second video of our Sew Along a Summer Quilting Tale. I hope you've been inspired and that you are enjoying some of these videos. I'm glad that you stopped by today. I truly am, because today is all about personalization. And I got to tell you, this is probably the most fun, in my opinion, and at the same time, the most challenging to really try to help you be inspired and find your creativity of your own. But that is one of the beautiful things about this type of quilt. It truly is your creation. Okay, from start to finish. One of the things that I wanted to do before I get started, maybe that will help with some of this personalization or inspiration for you, is I want to share some of the pictures that some of our friends are doing with this sew along. They've given me permission to share, so I'm going to take a second and just go through some of these. So first we have Andra, and she's already got hers done, and it's this darling wall hanging. Love the fabric choices, love this. Then we have Alice, and if you'll notice, all her books are labeled. She's got cute little sideways books, and I love that border. It looks like wood. Next we have Sharina, and she's using a gray background, and if you'll notice, she's got jars and vases and elephants. Oh my gosh, this is going to be awesome. Then we have Cindy, and Cindy, I don't know if she meant this, but that blue and tan reminds me of a beach. Love that idea. Might have to do it. Sharon here is doing a 50th year anniversary. She's calling it We Still Do. That world fabric, I wonder if she did a little traveling. Love it. Next and last is Vicki, and I just want to show how, in fact, she was doing her strips in her books. Isn't that cool? Wasn't that fun? I just love seeing what other people do because, yeah, I really like quilting, Candy, you know, love to look. But this type of quilt is so personalized that seeing other people and what they're doing really does start to really rejuvenate up or get that creativity going, right? Rejuvenate? Yeah, maybe. Bear with me. So it is about personalization. And I gotta tell you, personalization doesn't necessarily mean all the little intricate creative ideas that you'll be doing. It can be color, right? As you saw, people are doing different backgrounds. People are doing not necessarily a brown or a black bookshelf. You can do them in various colors, right? Because bookshelves are various colors. And let's face it, in quilting, you can create something that doesn't exist. So it's all truly about your creation and your specific inspiration and your end product that will come from this. So I do appreciate everybody who is sharing and who has allowed me to share it with the rest. And I hope that you'll find that inspiration also. Now, what other things could you see? You might see various things on bookshelves. We talked about this before, a picture frame that actually has a picture in it that you can take and put on fabric so that you can incorporate it inside and put it on one of your shelves, right? You might find some of them, yes, are doing embroidery on their books as labels, or you might find that people are using selvages as their book labels, or maybe even a different piece of fabric, just making it pretty. You might find, like we did talk about, people doing pets. You might find plants. And that's where this takes me to. Vicki, so graciously, you know that we're working together on this. I could not have done this without her. She has given us 3 different foundation paper piecing patterns that you can use. 2 of them are plants, and I think it's so funny because she labels one of them hard and the other one is called spiky. And I'm going to throw up a couple of pictures here so you can actually see Vicki's plants. you can tell, if I can remember correctly, that she hasn't quite figured out where they're going to go, but you can see that they're there and they're ready for use once she figures out exactly where to put them. And I think it's really cool too that you can see some of how it is that she's working through this project. Because again, that can give you some insight, it can give you some inspiration. So with those patterns, where can you find the 3 patterns? Now the third one is a teacup, so I'll tell you that. And you can find all 3 inside her group, My Creative Corner3, her private group there on Facebook. So you feel free to join. Got some lovelies in there that are really inspired and interacting along with this sew along. You can also find it on her blog. So both of those links are going to be down below for you to get those free patterns and to visit Vicki's world, which you will not be disappointed with. If you are in Creative Kingdom, you can also find them there for you. So what I'm going to do now, because it is foundation paper piecing, so if this is something that you are interested in doing, but you've never seen paper piecing, I'm going to do a little bit up here next with the teacup. And as you can see, here is my teacup. It's kind of far away. I don't know how well you'd be able to see that, but I'm going to bring you in and get you started with foundation paper piecing, and then we'll come right back. Okay, so here we are at my sewing table, and this is the pattern that we're going to be working with. It is an absolute adorable teacup that Vicki so graciously shared, and I'm going to put a picture right here, and I'm going to show you Vicki's teacup that she has done. Isn't it adorable? So I wanted to use this myself in my personalization. I think it'd be just absolutely darling. And I thought I would take you along to help describe how foundation paper piecing works. Now I have done a video on foundation paper piecing once, and you can find that link above, and it takes you all the way from start to finish. And it's it might have some more close-ups. There might be there are differences. The pattern's different, but just in case you want a little more, it's there for you. Now, what kind of things are you going to need? Well, first you're going to need some fabric, okay? And they totally can be scraps. I am not using they call it the no waste method. They're still waste, so I call it the low waste method. This is a very general method. It's not the no waste, so there is more waste in this method. Eventually I will do a video on low waste, but for today it's just a standard. So you're going to need your fabric. You're going to need either a ruler that has your 1/4 inch mark on it, or as I use an add a 1/4 ruler. And what I really like about this ruler is it has a lip, if you can see it right there. And I'll show you how to use this, but it allows me to get that 1/4 inch seam just perfect. And it makes it really easy. The thing about using a regular ruler is that it tends to be slippy slidey on paper, so you have to be very careful. You don't need the add a 1/4 ruler, but if you're interested, it will be on my website. It is on my website, not will be. It is there, and for the month of August, it's actually on sale. Link for that will be down in the description box for you too. So the other things you're going to need are maybe some fabric scissors, okay? Not your paper scissors, but your fabric scissors. You're going to need your cutting mat. Go ahead and heat that iron up with your pressing board. You might need some pins. I use pins. And of course, you're going to need your pattern. Now, I wanted to talk about this for just a second. What you're going to notice is that we have numbers 1 through 10 on this, okay? So we're going to actually follow it in order. There's a method to it to make it so, and there's no Y seams in here, and that makes it very nice, and you can get these beautiful little points. So you will notice that is your pattern. Then you'll notice a couple Vicki was so gracious to actually do some grayscale here, so you can actually see which fabric should be your teacup, and then the other color, the white paper, would be your background. And of course mine is black, so behind my shelves, so I'm going to use black as my background here. The pink is going to be for the teacup, and the black is for the background. All right, so it's very nice of her to do that, because not all patterns will do a grayscale for you. And at that point you can just color it in. The other thing I wanted to talk about with the pattern is they would always tell you what size that the block should finish as. And Vicki has done this also. This block should finish at 4 by 3 inches. And if you'll notice, we have this dark black line, okay? And then we have this lighter outline. This is your 1/4 inch seam around this block. So if we wanted to make sure that we printed this out at the correct size, from the dark line to the dark line this way should be 4 inches, and from this dark line up to this dark line should be 3 inches. And you can just simply take your ruler, line it up on that black line, and you'll see that mine is 4 inches across and 3 inches down. Okay, so I know that this is printed correctly. Sometimes your printer will change and in your settings, so you want to make sure that if you don't get the right size block, that you go and check your printer size, okay, because that will make or break you. If you wanted to make this larger, a lot of printers will allow you to blow this up bigger, and it would be very easy for you to go ahead and make this bigger, okay? Just whenever you print it out, you'll have to measure to see what size block you have. So this one we're working on, though, is a 4 by 3. Now I want to mention that some of these pieces here, if you look, they're tiny, okay? Anytime I have tiny pieces, I 90% of the time will starch heavily. Now this fabric is pretty stiff. I've starched it before, but I've been manhandling it so that it feels like this piece feels a little loose. You know, normally I would starch it because the smaller the pieces are, if you have a stiff piece of fabric, you can get crisper lines and it will make your sewing much easier. So I wanted to point that out because these are tiny. But we're going to go ahead and get this started. Now I've got a light facing out right now. Facing towards this camera, hence why you see a lot of shadowing, but I use a light to be able to see. So and I'll show you here in just a second. So we've got A1, that is going to be our first block. It is shaded, okay? I'm going to pull this up a little closer. It is shaded, so that tells me it's part of the teacup. It's actually the handle. Oh, I can't wait to get this done. So we're going to take our fabric, and you just want a piece, whoops, I'm sorry, hit the camera. You just want a piece that is going to be a little bigger than the 1/4 inch seam around, okay? So I know that this piece is definitely bigger, so I'm good there. At that point, we're going to flip the paper over, okay? Yep, it's pretty scary. Now, if you notice, let me see if I can get this. There we go. You can actually see the lines, which is going to be extremely helpful. You are going to want to place the first piece that you put down for number 1 is going to be right side up, okay? So I'm going to look for my lines, and I'm going to settle it in a little more than a 1/4 inch in those directions, okay? And then I'm going to pin it. Now, when you pin, you want to make sure that you don't pin near the sewing line. And we're going to be sewing and attaching the two, okay? So I need to make sure that my foot isn't going to hit that, and it will. So I'm going to take this out. I'm going to go a little bit further down, and I'm just going to pin it right there. And if I wanted to check, it's a little hard on this camera angle, and like I said, that other video I think does justice where you can see it, but I know that it's there. And if I wanted to, I can flip it up and take a peek, okay? The next thing we're gonna wanna do is we wanna add number 2. Now this is a non-shaded block, so I know that's my background. So of course it's going to be black. I just want to make sure that I have a piece that is going to be big enough all the way around, a little more than a 1/4 inch. Okay, so you might want to do a 3/8, okay, ish. You don't have to be precise here, but you do want to make sure that you are getting that lined up. Now, on the other side, what's going to happen is you're going to want to line this up with this line here, because we're going to flip it and it's going to have to cover this block, okay? So I want it to line up on this line above it with about 3/8 below it, which is kind of convenient because my pin will definitely work as a guideline. And I want to make sure I've got plenty on the other side covering, and the line is right here, and so I do. And that way, whenever I sew this, it'll flip on down and it will cover that entire block, okay? If you want to, you don't have to. You could again pin this block so that it stays. All right. And if you wanted to check again, there we are. Look, you can actually see my black piece of fabric comes to here. Okay. So I know that I have plenty of room down here. It's about 3/8, right? If not even a 1/2 inch. And so I know that when I flip this, it's going to cover this entire block. But we're going to take this to the sewing machine and we're going to stitch the line between A1 and A2. Something I failed to mention, and that's because I'm working with a solid and it doesn't have a right or wrong side. The second piece that you put down, okay, remember the first piece was right side up, right? The pattern is facing the table. The first piece of fabric, the pretty side is facing you. The next piece, piece number 2, they will be right side down. So the right sides will be together, okay? And that is the method throughout the rest of this process. The right sides will be together, and you'll see that as we go along. But I wanted to mention that just in case you do have a right side to your second piece, or you know, the next piece that you're using. First piece right side up, second piece right side down, so that the right sides are facing together. Okay, now I just wanted to show that to you. And remember, we are going to be sewing the line between A1 and A2 right along here, okay? So what I like to do is, to be honest with you, and bear with me, this is always a struggle for me to do this on a camera, through a camera lens, but you're going to want to line this up at the juncture where it starts. And I like to use my hand wheel, because that way I know that I'm getting it right where I want it to. So bear with me, it's taking me a little bit longer than normal. There we go. Some people like to back stitch here. I will. So I'm going to go ahead and start. I'm going to go 2 stitches. It's not a very long line. And the reason why I debated, to be honest with you, is because it is so short and there's another seam next to it. So it really isn't necessary. But you're really just simply going to sew along that line. And when you, whoop, I went too far. When you get there at the end, Again, I backstitch. You don't have to do that here, but go ahead and cut your threads. We're going to pull this out. And as you see, oh, I didn't go too far. Whew. Whoops, I am so sorry. Just hit the camera again. Hold, hold, hold. There we go. Okay. Like I said, this is so much fun doing this through a camera lens. So as you see, I have, in fact, sewed right along that line. Okay. The next thing that we're going to do, I will show you at the cutting mat. Okay, here we are at the cutting mat, and I went ahead and removed my pins. One of the things I failed to mention is you might need a rotary blade and of course some thread snippers, right? I am going to use the rotary blade here. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we've sewed in between A1 and A2, right? So we're going to take it and fold back so A2 is on top. You're going to fold right along that sewing line that you have created, okay? Now here's where the add a quarter ruler comes in. That lip is right here, and it will simply slide and lock in. And then that way, see, it hits that paper, and then that way I can go ahead and cut. You could very simply line up your ruler on this 1/4 inch mark along that paper line. Hold this real tight because it is slippy slidey on paper, and then simply go ahead and cut your 1/4 inch seam. So you want to make sure that your bottom fabric isn't flipped crazy, and as you see, there's that extra that we sewed with, and not all of it, so I know it's good. And I'm just simply going to cut. And if y'all noticed, I did change my blade. Now, open the paper back up, and what we're going to do now is just very simply fold this up, give it a little finger press, and at this point you could take it to your iron and press very gently, because we're not sure which side of the grain. We don't want to stretch anything too crazy, but very gently go ahead and press that down. That's why I suggested that you in fact heat up your iron, because you're going to be doing this method throughout. I'm going to go ahead and give mine a real quick press here, and I'm literally pressing it, okay, because I did a short little finger press, so it's laying pretty flat. And now what we're going to do is we're going to attach 3 to 2. So I'll meet you back up here and we'll do the next step. Okay, so here we are back at the cutting table, and I have pressed this. It's now facing the correct direction. My number 1 piece, my number 2 piece. Notice the number 2, if this was important, it would be right side up. Now we're going to sew 3 to 2. So you want to find a big enough piece that again will cover, this is definitely big enough, all the way around, at least 3/8 all the way around, right? This line right here is the one that we are going to sew on. Now I got to thinking about this, and I think it's going to work. So making sure that my number 2 fabric is still facing down, I'm going to pin along this line, because that's about my sewing line, and I want to make sure that I'm at least 3/8 below. I'm going to, have enough, but also remember that the majority of your fabric is going to be above this line. So whenever you sew it on and you flip it, that it's going to cover that entire block, okay? This is a line we're sewing on. Majority of fabric will face above it, okay? Above the block that you're going to be working on. And your right sides are going to be facing together. Okay, so here's that stitch line. Super love this idea. And this piece is huge, so I know I'm not going to have any problems. I'm going to go ahead and pin it. Right sides are together. Majority of my fabric is sitting above that sew line. Okay, but you very well could take your fingers Let me get in the light here. Take your finger, my middle finger, find the edge of that fabric. And of course you can see it here. It's definitely got plenty, and I've got plenty above here. So whenever I go to flip it, it's going to cover this little bitty box. Yes, it's a big piece of fabric, so I'm good to go. So at this point, I'm going to remove this pin because I'm going to sew on this line. So I'm going to go ahead and do that off camera, and I'll come back and we'll do the fold and cut again. And basically the method stays the same throughout. Okay, I have sewn that line. Okay, right on that line. I'm just going to cut a little bit. Now I didn't backstitch at the beginning, so I left a little bit of a tail for now. Also, I put a little note in the beginning, but I wanted to mention that you want to lower your stitch count. I do mine at 1.8, so you want to go ahead and lower that stitch count because we're going to end up taking this paper off, and that will help perforate, and it'll help keep the seams intact, which I will show you when I'm done sewing this whole thing together. I did put a note, but I wanted to talk about it again. So now, again, we are going to put this block on top, this 3 block, okay, because we're going to fold on this line that we just sewn. You want to make sure that all your fabric is laying appropriately and nothing is split. Ask me why I know that. Then you're simply going to take your rotary cutter and your ruler, cut off the excess, open her back up. I'm actually going to remove the pin now. Flip her down, give her a finger press, and I'm going to take this to the iron. And then you would simply now add 4. After 4 is together, you'll see you'll have a straight line here. Then you'd add 5. You can see when you add 5, you'll have this line available, so you'll add 6. And you'll just do this all the way through until you get to 10. And then when I'm done, I'll bring you back and I'll show you the next steps. Y'all, I just had to come back and show you another piece because I'm really liking this new idea I got. I've been doing this for years and it never dawned on me. So I'm in the process right now of adding 8. Yes. So again, I have my fabric. It's definitely big enough, right? And remember, because I want it to fold down, majority of the fabric will be up here, but I need at least 3/8 below. Because when I go to flip it, I want it to cover. So I am loving this, but I'm going to put a pin along this sew line, right? And it doesn't have to be perfect, just a good reference. And yeah, you gotta love this too. Doesn't look much like a teacup, does it? It will, I promise. Right sides together. Here's my sew line. Okay. And if I really, really needed to, I could light check it and you can see where my fabric is, and it's definitely there. Matter of fact, I could even come up a little. I can feel my pin. I just really love this method. So there we have it. So I definitely want to pin this at this point to keep the fabric where it's at. One more simple light check. And I can see my fabric is where it needs to be. Right sides are together. I'm going to pull this pin out where I'm going to sew and get another piece on. I just wanted to demonstrate using this pin again because I'm just really loving that, giving us a guide where that line is. It just really does help a lot, especially when you are struggling without a light box and using a window or a bright light to be able to see through that paper. This really does give you a great place to have that guide. So I'm going to get this done. I'm going to get this piece on. Then I just have 9 and 10, and then I'll come back and we'll talk about the rest of it. So I got it all sewn. And yeah, it truly doesn't look that much of a, a mug. This process always cracks me up because it always looks worse than it is. So now we're going to clean this all up and get it ready so that we can put it in the quilt. So I've added all of my pieces, all 10. I've done the folding back and cutting all the seams, but now we're going to cut the block. Now you want to make sure that none of your pieces are flipped in the wrong direction. Again, now I am going to simply cut this 1/4 inch seam line, okay? So this will allow me to put my block into my quilt. You could use a regular ruler at this time, and remember, this is really loose. I mean, your ruler may slip and slide, so you want to be really careful. But I am going to line this ruler up right along the 1/4 inch, and I'm going to simply cut out my block along that 1/4 inch seam line. So okay, one more, guys. Okay, let's see if it'll pull out. Yes, it will. Whoop, I got a little piece that wanted to hang on. So I'm very simply going to line this back up. Now this will be a little easier because I have the paper giving me a little bit of a lip. Oh, it was hanging on by a thread. Gotta love it. And there we have it. Isn't it just so cute? Now, I did want to mention that was all one piece, right? All right. Her plant, if you'll notice, we have groups, and you'll see, like on this one, you have a solid line and you have your dotted line. So your dotted lines are the 1/4 inch seam, okay, to allow it to go together. And you'll have A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and H. You want to build them in groups. So you'll build A first. Then it's typically, you wouldn't have to, but you'd go to B, and then you'd go to C. But you could just go down the line, just making sure they stay in groups. And what I find interesting about this pattern, this is why I wanted to talk about it, sometimes you'll find it where they'll be next to each other in the order. So it'll be A, B, C, D, E, F, and you would know, you so B to E, I'm sorry, B to A, C, etc., etc. But this one's not like that. I'm going to throw her picture up so you could see her plant. And when you come back to this pattern, you'll notice that this is exactly how it should lay out. So you might want to take a picture of this so you don't forget what letter goes with which. But you build A first, okay? And you could, at this point, build E. You just want to build each one of these separate. You'll build G separate, build H separate, and then you leave the paper on. When you're going to cut these out, okay? You'll want to leave the paper on. That way you can line up those seams and you'll have some reference points to line up the other items. So you'll put the right sides together so the papers will be on the outside, okay? And when you sew these two together along these lines, you'll have reference points to also make sure that these things are lining up. Okay, if that is confusing to you and you want a little bit more, let me know. I can work with a pattern that has multiple, but I definitely would take a picture or print more than one of these so that you knew what goes where together, and just know you'll build A by itself, build B by itself, build G by itself. Okay, and you still follow the number. So 1, then 2 to 1, 3 to both of these, then you add 4 to 2, And then when you have all this together, you'd add 5. So you're still within those blocks, those individual blocks, you're still going in order of how it tells you to sew them. So G down here, you have G, and you'd add the 2 to 1. And then once you get these 2 together, you add 3 to 1, okay? So it's the same method, you just are doing it in groups, and then you put your groups together. Okay, so the teacup, yes, and as y'all saw, here is the broken teacup, right? It's got a broken handle. Bought it at an antique store, thought it was cute, got a discount because it was broke. No, I'm kidding. So yeah, I thought about whether or not, I really struggled. Should I redo the video? Should I not? You know, with video, we can make everything look perfect. And I just decided to leave it in there just to be able to talk about that, that we're not all perfect and we do make mistakes. Every single one of us, that's part of the human nature of ourselves, is that we are not perfect. And that's also includes in our quilts. I ended up redoing it and I did fix it. Now, somebody could ask, well, why didn't you rip seams? Well, really, when it gets down to foundation paper piecing, it really depends on where the mess up is and how many seams ago it was. You know, how far into the product are you? And this particular one is piece number 4. Yes, I still could have ripped seams, and yes, Y seams don't scare me, but I do know that once you start ripping out seams, you can cause more havoc than necessary. It can be just a lot easier to redo it, and it was. And so I'm going to put this, I'm never going to let this go. I'm going to use it in my orphan block quilt that I'm going to make one day, because I've got a ton of them, because I'll never forget, not all of us are perfect. And I just wanted to share that with you, that it's okay. And just depending on where you are, like if it was down here, I can rip seams, right? Or if I would have caught it at the beginning when I did it and I folded it open and looked, I could have redone it then, right? But it wasn't the case. It was several hours after, when I was on the phone with my mom and I looked up at the design board and I said, oh my gosh, I have an error. So just a little heads up on that one. It's okay, just keep going. So the other thing I did in foundation paper piecing is, if you'll notice, I do have a tilted book here, okay? Now my husband always gets, it blows his mind. It looks like it's floating right now, and it only looks that way because of the 1/4 inch seam. Once I put the bookshelf down, it won't float any longer. So I was shared another method on how to do a tilted book, and it was like a hope you did it right, hope you cut it right, hope you sewed it right kind of a method. And I don't like doing that all the time, right? So I ended up doing a foundation paper piecing pattern that did this tilted book, okay? And that way I wasn't using the hope it's right method. I know it's right, okay? And for those of you who are in My Creative Corner 3 and in Halo's Creative Kingdom, you'll be getting that pattern for free. But I wanted to share that, in fact, you can even do a tilted book. This is another one of my personalizations. Now, if you'll also notice, I have a blank spot, and my idea is to do a pot, and I'm going to make it a pocket. So I'm going to leave the pot blank up on top, okay? And I'm going to create this pocket so I can stick, I don't know, flowers in it, you know, fake flowers. I can put a draping plant maybe. Heck, you can put other things in as long as they'll stick out. But my plan is to make this area for a pocket that is a pot holder, okay? And then you'll also might notice that I have some sideways books that my teacup sits right on top. Now, before I get into this, I wanted to mention, for those of you who really enjoy applique, you can take foundation paper piecing patterns and turn them into, very simply by tracing, you can turn those into applique patterns. And that's the beauty of it. So if you're not real comfortable with foundation paper piecing, or you'd rather do applique, you can go with yourself. So back to the sideways books. You don't have to, how you do your stuff is you, right? But I'm going to take you in on some of the ideas that I did to get this lined up the way that I wanted. So I'm going to bring you in closer back to my sewing table, and I'm going to show you how I got this stack of books together. So I'll see you there. Okay, so to begin with, I started off with deciding which books I would lay out to be on my sideways books, okay? And then what I basically did, because I know I'm going to put the teacup on top, I basically am going to cut this blue part at 10 inches, this one at 9, 8, 7, 6, okay? And I think, now I can change this as I go along, but I think what I'm going to do, I'm going to cut this at 10 inches. Well, it might help if I put this correctly. I am going to cut this blue strip at 10 inches, so I'm going to cut this end off, which is good because I need to straighten it out anyway. And then I'm going to make this strip using, when I cut this down to 10 inches, I'm going to make this entire strip 12.5. All of mine are going to be 12.5 inches, okay? So 10 plus an inch and a half and an inch and a half is, that's too much. So 10 plus an inch and a quarter and an inch and a quarter will come to 12.5 inches, right? So I'm going to cut an inch and a quarter here and an inch and a quarter off of the other end, and then reattach it. So I'm going to get a lot of that done, and then I will come back and show you how I continue this and some other ideas that you may have. Okay, I wanted to bring in just a little bit here. I'm showing you exactly what I'm doing. So I've already done 10 and 9, so this strip is going to be cut at 8. And I noticed that this is actually at 8, so I won't have to cut this. But if there was anything left over after 8, I would simply cut this off, right? Now I'm rounding to about 13 inches because I feel like that'll give me some easier math, right? And some flexibility in the event that I need that. So that would be 2.5 inches on each side, because 8 plus 5 is 13. So on this side, I'm actually going to cut 2.5 inches. Okay. Get this going here, making sure we're straight. And actually, I'm going to flip it around so I cut this correctly because we want to cut safe. So I'm lining that seam up on 2.5. Okay. I'm actually going to do it on the seam because I have the ability to do that. Okay. It's still not straight. All right. Then we're just going to cut 2.5 inches. Now, from all of this, you would think I'd cut 2.5, right? And you could. But I'm actually going to add 1/4 because that'll be inside my seam. So I'm just going to then line up 2 1/4, or 2 3/4, excuse me, and give it a nice cut. Put the right sides together and sew along this seam. So that 1/4 inch, okay, and then that'll give me my next strip. Then I'll keep moving on. And what's really nice, I've got a nice piece here that I can work with for another book. However, the next step would be that we're going to start joining them together, correct? And if they're all different lengths, how would you go about doing that? So here's my plan of action. I have taken, this is my bottom strip, Okay, I've taken it wrong sides together. I lined up these seams because it's up in the middle of this part of the strip that I want to find. So I lined up those seams and I gave it a finger press. That's all this was. And I did put this one wrong sides together. Okay, wrong sides are together, lined up these seams, and then gave it a finger press. That gave me a nice center with a little mountain. On this one, I put the wrong sides together. I still lined up these seams. I'm sorry, I put the wrong sides together. I put the right sides together on this one, lined up those seams, gave it a finger press, and with the right sides together, it gave me a valley. So the first one was wrong sides together, second one was right sides together. And then very simply, I can line those peaks and valleys up, give myself a 1/4 inch seam, sewing those together. Well, that's the wrong side because you want to make sure that you open it up correctly. So I'd sew these two together, and then I'd have the centers of this strip lined up. And I'll do that for the next one when I add it on. I'll fold everything together, give me a marking spot. And, you know, and actually if this is still there, I can use this peak still. You could put a pin here if you want to, but I don't like pins all the time. So if this is still here, I won't have to refold it. I'll just fold this next one with the wrong sides together and match this valley and peak, okay? And that way, mine are going to be straight. Now, you don't have to do it this way. This is the cool thing. You could line them up so that your seams all lined up, okay? And so you'll have the books getting shorter and shorter, but you'll have this straight line. So there are many options. You could even do it where one has this straight line, the next one has a different, you know, it lines up different. It's all up to how you want these sideways books to go. But I'm doing it where they're coming to like, you know, equal, and they're nice and pretty sitting. It's part of the OCD in me, right? So I am going to go ahead and do some more of these, and I will see you in a bit. Okay, I just wanted to take a second and bring you in and show you how I'm thinking about squaring off this little project. So I have one seam over here that is shorter than the rest. So I went ahead and lined up the edge to here. This is a 12.5 inch squared ruler. So you can see that this in fact is going to end to be 12.5. It doesn't really much matter to me where these things actually are sitting. I'm very comfortable with the way this is looking. So what I'm doing is I've lined up my seam lines, made sure everything was straight. Okay, I've lined up along this edge of this fabric, and I'm simply going to just trim off this excess. So I'm going to turn my cutting mat instead of everything else. Okay, and I'm just going to again cut off the edges. And to be real honest with you, it doesn't even matter really how big this is, as long as my teacup will fit on top. So, and it will, because it's roughly 8 inches. It's a little shorter than that, but my teacup is what, 3 inches, so that's 11, so I'll have to add some black above it. Hey, it works. But that's how I decided to square this off, and I will see you all back at the design wall. Okay, so there it is, the bookshelf. It kind of looks like a cake to me, but that's okay. So I'm still toying with how I'm going to put this all together. But at this point, I wanted to bring up a couple of pictures of Vicki's again, because she also has some sideways books, and what she's doing just a little bit different. And I absolutely love it. And maybe you will love it just as much too. And if you want sideways books, you can see how she's thinking that hers will look, and it just may inspire you. But yes, those are sideways books. Another thing I wanted to talk about that I'm doing is, after I get this whole thing quilt and bound, I'm going to put a button on one of the top of my bookshelf, in the border. And what I'm going to do with that is I'm actually going to hang the mask that I'm wearing during COVID. Okay, this quilt will be made during that time period, so I wanted a place where I could hang my mask, and I thought a button would be great. So a button will go there, but it made me start to think about buttons. You could actually use buttons inside your books to give it some decorative effect, or you could put them in different places on your border or at different points in your shelves, just for some, bling, or a little. You can find different things like that on books, right? But a little artistic value, something to draw some interest. So those are and you can find buttons in every shape and size and everything, right? So I just got to thinking that might be a really cool thing to see, is buttons. Next week, guys. Oh, I wanted to also tell you, sorry, my mind is starting to escape me. Places that you can find some more inspiration. If you Google bookshelf quilts and hit the image button, you'll get a ton. Okay. Another thing, if you use Pinterest, there are various different places that people have put together bookshelf quilts on their space. So I don't know how to use Pinterest. I'm not a Pinterest girl, but I do know that Vicki is, and she has a bookshelf quilt Pinterest. So I will get that link. Bear with me. I'm completely ignorant when it comes to Pinterest. I'll get that link and I'll put it in the description for you below. It's another great place to find some inspiration to do some personalization to your quilt. Now, if you're following along, you will need to have your shelves complete by next week. Okay. And it goes fast, guys. It truly does. Once you start moving, it goes very quickly. The reason is because we're going to start sashing and borders next week. Okay. Now, I will tell you that I'm only sewing 3 or 4 books together at a time, and I'm attaching my sashing to it and then sewing them together, because I'm trying to eliminate one long seam. And if I did one long seam here, I'd have one long seam, and then I'd want to attach the sashing again, I'd have another one. So I'm just eliminating one on each round, but it's still eliminating one. And I really do not like long seams that much that I'm doing the extra work. Now I'll talk about the normal traditional method of doing sashing next week, and I will demonstrate doing the border. The idea is that we don't have friendly borders, right? So I'll definitely be talking about that next week. So getting your shelves done means that you need to get them all the same size, right? This is how I'm attempting to do this, okay? So if you'll notice, each shelf has a big book, okay? So I've got a 3-inch. So I've got a 3-inch here, I've got a 3-inch here, and I have a 3-inch here. And the reason is, if I get these all sewn together and I measure and I figure out they're going to be 30 inches, for instance, right? Then let's say this one's 32 or 30 and a half or 31. It's easier for me to cut from 3 inches than it is for me to cut from 1 3/4 inches. Of course, if it was 32 inches, I'd probably add another book over here. I don't know what exactly I'll do, but yeah, I am going to pull from a 3-inch book. I don't want to pull from something this skinny. It'd be easier for me to pull from here. I don't want to pull from my tilted books, which they will be on the end. It's easier for me to pull from here. So I wanted to give you some insight on how to start, depending on how long your quilt is, right? I mean, if you're doing a 12-foot thing, that's a whole different ball game. But you just want to be cognitive of where you're going to pull from, unless you're doing exact math I did not. I'm just slapping them together, measuring it out, squaring it off by pulling from my 3-inch. Okay. So I wanted to share that. The other thing, because we're doing sashing and borders next week, I wish it was binding, right? If you haven't done it yet, make sure to order your backing material and your batting, because we are going to quilt this. That's in 2 weeks. Now these videos will stay. So if you're following along and you're taking your time, you go with yourself. But if you're following along at the same pace, make sure you get that backing and your batting ready, okay? And try to think about the batting that you buy. Because I'm doing that flower pot, I ended up buying batting that I only have to stitch 8 inches apart, not anything smaller. It concerned me because I'm going to have some space where there won't be quilting because it's a pocket, and I didn't want to close the pocket with the quilt. So just be very cognitive of, you know, what kind of batting you're buying and how much space that you're going to give yourself. Especially if you're doing some applique and you don't want to run into the applique. That's another big one, unless you end up going through it. So yeah, backing, batting, make sure you get that done. Get your shelves done, and I will see you all next week. Or I will see you today at 3 p.m. on Facebook Eastern Standard Time for a live Q&A. I will be there just for you to answer any questions. And if Vicki is available, she will also be there. So if you have any questions for Vicki, that would be a good place to go too. We both hope that we will see you there. And I'm sure Vicki would agree. Until next time, may you all continue to be inspired, productive, and joyful. And never stop making your quilts or your quilting dreams come true. See y'all then.